Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. And my God, what a year it's been already. Let me start with an announcement which I think reverberated across North America in particular, and all those folks telling me it's just the flu. CDC admits the spread of the coronavirus in the US appears inevitable. That's from Mishkia. And they've conducted, I think, something like 450 tests. Compare that to South Korea, which is over 30,000. And I'll come to this point in a moment. But essentially, I think what this has done is made it crystal clear that this problem is not going away. The 10-year US Treasury yield fell to a record low. That's the dive into safe havens I spoke about severally, but in late January specifically. Economists are wargaming the pandemic threat to global growth. This is an article in Bloomberg. The worrying prospect that the coronavirus outbreak could become the first truly disruptive pandemic of the globalization era is renewing doubts over the stability of the world economy. Oxford Economics reckons an international health crisis could be enough to wipe more than $1 trillion from the global GDP. That would be the economic price tag for a spike in workplace absenteeism, lower productivity, sliding travel, disrupted supply chains, and reduced trade and investment. IMF currently reckons the virus will only force it to knock 0.1 percentage point off its 3.3% global growth forecast for 2020. That's patently not even feasible. However, I agree with the chief economist Gita Gopinath, who said in a Yahoo Finance interview that a pandemic declaration, and we don't need a declaration, Dr. Tedros is irrelevant in this matter, it's obvious, would risk really downside dire scenarios. We're in that territory now, make no mistake. South Korea's economy is being buffeted with consumer confidence plunging the most in 5 years. I agree with Axel Weber, who I met many years ago and is the UBS Group chairman, who's far more pessimistic than the IMF and warned global growth will experience a massive drop from 3.5% to 0.5%. and China will shrink in the first quarter. That is the correct analysis. The much larger downside risk is that this continues to be a problem, he said. A disastrous health crisis akin to the 1918 Spanish flu, which may have killed as many as 50 million people, could cost 5% of global GDP, the Washington-based lender said in a 2015 report. That's the scenario we're looking at. People are worried about their families, worried about their health. 25 basis points doesn't do it in terms of encouraging people to go out there and spend. Raoul, I know I sound alarmist, but literally no one can price the tail risk on this virus event. It is a true black swan. Maybe it is seasonal and we are okay, forget about that. Maybe it isn't. It could shut down Europe, maybe it doesn't. The markets will not be able to deal with this uncertainty. 24th of February, which was my latest iteration in a series of 4, I said we're past the point of no return, mathematically speaking. I called it an unprecedented moment. Scott Minerd, this is not a buy the dip market. It is a don't catch a falling knife market. That is the point. And I saw Trump was trying to cajole the market, and he's going to be he's going to get a rude awakening, I'm afraid. As I said, a coronavirus speaks to non-linearity and exponential risks. I've only been at the Fed for 2 years, Richmond Federal Reserve Bank President Tom Barkin said, but to my mind, central banks can't come up with vaccines. This is the point. Let me divert briefly into some home thoughts. I'm reading Carlos Fuentes. I went to the Mosaica Library and I saw these books haven't been taken out for more than 10 years. The book I'm reading is The Years with Laura Diaz. And that for the first time I discovered his short stories. They were remarkable, luminous, metaphysical even. This, I would say, not as good as those short stories, but actually very good. A sweeping portrait of Mexico's past centuries seen through the life of Laura Diaz, a wife and mother who by chance and acts of will becomes a committed artist, boldly written, robustly readable. It stands as Fuentes' highest achievement yet, one that should rekindle his appeal to female readers. Novel opens in 1999 when a Mexican man visits Detroit to photograph the famous mural Henry Ford commissioned from Diego Rivera. Amid the painting's swirl of faces and images, he fixates upon the mysterious visage of a woman who turns out to be Laura Diaz, his great-grandmother, and a friend and muse to the communist artist. The story of Laura's life unfolds from her modest provincial upbringing in the Veracruz home of a Mexican banker and his German mail-order bride. It really is very good. It's just in comparison to those short stories, which are short and so spectacular. But it is fantastic, and I've only recently discovered Carlos Fuentes. The passage into the tomb chamber, circa 1637, Jahangir's tomb in Lahore, from William Dalrymple. And that, for some reason, took me to John Donne, for I'm involved in mankind. Therefore send not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. This is Margarita Peak, 5,125 meters, the highest peak of the Ruwenzori Mountains in Uganda. The peak is permanently snow-capped. That's from Love Ngawa. Saudi authorities used pesticides to protect plants, but ended up poisoning 10,000 camels who ate the plants, killing hundreds of camels, while the locust problem continues. And it certainly feels like a decade of semiotic arousal when everything it seemed was a sign, a harbinger of some future radical disjuncture or cataclysmic upheaval. And then this was from Today_China. Even the crows are dying. And a lot of people are speculating those crows are there because of dead bodies. I remember reading a book called The Crow Eaters. It's about the Parsis in India. And they too burnt the bodies, and the crows come to eat the dead bodies. 14th century brass heads from an Ife royal burial, lesser known court figures under King Obalafon Alameo's reign in the 13th century. That's from R. Haplord, Museum of Antiquities and Contemporary Art, Nigeria. Political reflections. I can't bear to look at what's going on in India. I really can't, but I have to. If they can't identify you as a Muslim, they ask you to recite Hanuman Chalisa. If you can't, they beat you to death and toy around with your corpse. That's from S.J. Peace. I've written severally about it, and on the 2nd of December I called it the politics of ethnocratic nationalism. And I was saying it's not a unique phenomenon to India. Hindus and Muslims collecting burnt pages of the Quran outside the masjid that was vandalized in Ashok Nagar, Delhi yesterday. That's from Citizen Kamran. The most in-depth and incisive article I've read about Modi and the RSS was by Rana Ayub and Dexter Filkins in the New Yorker. It's called Blood and Soil in Narendra Modi's India. The police and soldiers were using small-gauge shotguns called pellet guns by the locals, and some of the victims had been blinded. Go to the ophthalmology ward, the doctor said. This is when she gets to Kashmir. Among the lower caste recruits was an 8-year-old named Narendra Modi from Vadnagar, a town in the state of Gujarat. Modi belonged to the low-ranking Ganchi caste, whose members traditionally sell vegetable oil. Modi's father ran a small tea shop near the train station, where his young son helped. When Modi was 13, his parents arranged for him to marry a local girl, but they cohabited only briefly. He started by cleaning the living quarters of senior members, but he rose quickly. In 1987, he moved to the RSS's political branch, the Bharatiya Janata Party, or BJP. It needed an issue to attract sympathizers, and it found one in an obscure religious dispute. In the northern city of Ayodhya was a mosque called Babri Masjid, built by the Mughal Emperor Babur in 1528. And that became the flashpoint that drove them to power, in point of fact. For the RSS, the initiative in Ayodhya paid off spectacularly. Membership soared, and by 1996, the BJP had become the largest party in parliament. Most of them belonged to the religious wing of the RSS, called the VHP, and this is the situation where the train caught fire in Gujarat. Take revenge and slaughter the Muslims. According to eyewitnesses, rioters cut open the bellies of pregnant women and killed their babies. Others gang-raped women and girls. In at least one instance, a Muslim boy was forced to drink kerosene and swallow a lighted match. The chief minister of the Gujarati government was Narendra Modi, who had been appointed to the position 5 months before. As the riots accelerated, Modi became invisible. He summoned the Indian army but held the soldiers in their barracks, and the violence spun out of control. They were acting in an organized way. Asked about this, Modi said relief camps are actually child-making factories. Those who keep on multiplying the population should be taught a lesson. No sectarian riot ever happens in India unless the government wants it, Manda told me. This was a state-sponsored massacre, as it is now. If we raise the self-respect and morale of 50 million Gujaratis, he said, the schemes of Alis, Malis and Jamalis will not be able to do us any harm. And then saying Modi became a hero for all the Hindus of India. This is what people tell me at parties, at dinners. People genuinely feel the Muslims are terrorists, and it is because of Modi that Muslims are finally under control. And then she goes into a backstory. It's quite extraordinary, the level of scholarship in this article, in point of fact. I have to commend them both. Well worth reading in full. Modi, at one point, she goes undercover, she meets him, he shows her copies of Barack Obama's books. He said, Mathili, look at this. I want to be like him someday, she recalled. She was struck by his canniness. I thought Modi was either going to be Prime Minister or he was going to jail. By 2012, he'd become the most recognizable BJP leader in India, ran for Prime Minister in the fall of 2013. The accelerated growth was a fantastically crafted fiction, according to Prasad. Then, not long after Modi took power, there's a case of Sobradin Sheikh in which his old friend Amit Shah was implicated. Have a read about that also. She wrote something called The Gujarat Files, Anatomy of a Cover-Up. Then talking about Amit Shah, who seems to be quite a powerful figure, and his number two, basically saying group of election workers at the party's social media networks were an unstoppable force. Do you understand what I'm saying, he said. We're capable of delivering any message we want to the public, whether sweet or sour, true or fake, and indeed they are. Most of the country, well, many are illiterate. When Muslims are lynched, Modi typically says nothing, and since he rarely holds press conferences, he's almost never asked about them. It's a stunning article, well worth reading. Muzaffar and Ali from Kashmir were released. Their father took them to the local hospital. They've broken my bones, Muzaffar said. I can no longer prostrate myself before God. Let's move on. Mike Bloomberg's senior advisor, Tim O'Brien, has a pop at Bernie Sanders, and some incredible allegations, I must admit. I mean, some folks are trying to defend Bernie, but if half of this is true, I think he's done for. Let's return to the subject at hand, which is this virus. An epidemiologist makes an assessment here that COVID-2019 is already uncontained, predicts coronavirus will become seasonal, and 70% of people will catch it. My back-of-the-envelope math, this is comparativist. 1% CFR, 55 million people die. 1.5% CFR, 82 million people die. 2% CFR, 109 million people die. This is no joke. Jody Graphics 15, who puts out some very easy to read graphs. Share of daily confirmed cases in Wuhan, right axis, Hubei province excluding Wuhan, rest of China excluding Hubei, rest of the world excluding ship and cruise ship, all four on left axis. In my recent article, I said we're past the point of no return. Mathematically speaking, the viral moment has arrived. Nearly half of the cases so far outside of China have been reported in the past 4 days, and that's the multiplicative, non-linear, exponential side of viruses. Fresh outbreaks in Italy and Iran, galloping rate of new infections in South Korea and Japan suggests that COVID-19 is skipping past our quarantine cordons quite as easily as it jumps the body's defenses. These countries are canaries in the coal mine that the virus is quite active, a sign that containment is reaching the end of its applicability, said Ian Mackay. There could be these sorts of spot fires burning everywhere with us not knowing. Africa is one clear example. They've done, I think, less than 20 tests in Addis Ababa where they've been receiving 1,500 people a day from China. Just do the maths. It's too early to call, but it's on a knife edge. TRVRB, we believe that international seeding events started to occur in mid-January. Thus, we have a critical 10 weeks from then to late March to contain these nascent outbreaks before they become sizable. Richard Engel, if you see one cockroach, you know there are more. And in my opinion, what is absolutely clear now is that we're dealing with a virus that has turned exponential and non-linear and is a pandemic. And don't speak to me about Dr. Tedros' characterization. I think he's an abomination. I really do. I feel like networked, multi-sited epidemic system. That's how Tedros is calling it. Suspiciously sounds like a P word that I know, but what do I know? I only stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night, Dr. Eric Ding. Doctors and the WHO don't understand multiplication. They understand medicine and addition, not multiplication. That's Taleb. The greatest shortcoming of the human race is our ability, is our inability to understand the exponential function, Professor Alan Bartlett. When paranoid, you can be wrong 1,000 times and you will survive. If non-paranoid, wrong once and you, your genes and the rest of your group are done. It's a huge mystery that academics who deal with risk, rationality, sub-forecasting and super-forecasting fail to get it. William Burroughs, a paranoid is someone who knows little of what's going on. Steve Bannon, who over-eggs it, but is still interesting in some of the points he's making. Pandemic coronavirus is out of control in China. Long interview. Z has extensive experience at silencing viral ideas, but controlling an actual virus itself is outside his experience. So at the very least, we can say he appears to be playing a high-risk game. And my point is, for President Trump, it is a mirror image of the risk and trap Z fell into head first. You dilly-dally and you get skewered because of its non-linearity and exponential characteristics. And that's why I called it an unprecedented moment. I saw a tweet from Chris Martinson, who's been a tremendous resource every day on peak prosperity. If you haven't followed him on YouTube, please do, and on Twitter. And I was responding to him, and I said, I think we have massively overestimated the intelligence of our leaders because of the adulatory media echo chamber. And this COVID 2019 is showing us that they are linear, behind the curve and deluded. In October, I was saying the world in the 21st century exhibits viral wildfire and exponential characteristics and feedback loops which only become obvious in hindsight, and that a non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine. In point of fact, I was quoting the Chinese poet, "Let me tell you, world, I do not believe. If 1,000 challenges lie beneath your feet, count me as number 1,001. I don't believe the sky is blue. I don't believe in thunder's echoes. I don't believe that dreams are false. I don't believe that death has no revenge." Groucho Marx, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? Epsilon Theory has written a tremendous article. He's written a series of them. This is called The Fall of Wuhan. In August 2005, the city of New Orleans fell. New Orleans did not fall because of Hurricane Katrina. New Orleans fell because of the corrupt political response to Hurricane Katrina. In January 2020, the city of Wuhan fell. Wuhan did not fall because of COVID-19. Wuhan fell because of the corrupt political response to COVID-19. Wuhan is a heroic city, and people of Hubei and Wuhan are heroic people who have never been crushed by any difficulty and danger in history. All regions and departments perform their duties actively and conscientiously. Z, the commander, no, I'm not making this up. This is how the Xinhua News Service describes him now, Z, the commander. A corrupt political response occurs when a political leader sacrifices national interest for regime or bureaucratic interest. When a constructed narrative of calm and competent control is maintained for the political benefit of the leader at the expense of the led. The leader and his flunkies will convince themselves that the narrative is in the public interest, that the narrative will buy them time, that the narrative is necessary because the other side would do the same or worse if given half a chance. It's all the excuses that all the Renfields to all the professional politicians tell themselves as they slowly sell their souls. It's what every president and every director general and every senator and every CEO eventually comes to believe, that their personal interests are identical to their people's interests. Corrupt political responses occur all the time. literally every day all over the world. It's not a left-right thing. It's not a Democrat-Republican thing. It's not a Chinese thing or an American thing or a Russian thing. It's a power thing. It's a high-functioning sociopath thing. Not only are corrupt political responses as common as rain, they're almost never big deals. It's not treason, it's not Benedict Arnold selling a map of West Point. It's petty stuff, it's patronage appointments, it's log rolling, it's pork barrel politics. Who's going to notice? Who's hurt? But every once in a while, an honest-to-God crisis reveals the consequences of your petty everyday corruption, consequences that are paid in the lives of those who trusted you to be better. Every once in a great while, an honest-to-God crisis reveals the political self-interest and mendacity behind your carefully constructed narrative of yea, calm and competent control. Like the fall of New Orleans revealed George W. Bush, like the fall of Wuhan revealed Xi Jinping. What we must prevent today is the next city to fall. We must prevent the fall of Daegu. We must prevent the fall of Kon. We must prevent the fall of Milan. Looking ahead, we must prevent the fall of Yokohama. We must prevent the fall of San Francisco, because containment has failed. What we're seeing in South Korea, Iran and Italy is what exponential disease propagation looks like in the real world. Real world data is spiky. Real world data is messy. Real world exponential growth looks like nothing, then cluster, then boom. My rule of thumb, when a country reports a death from a local COVID-19 infection, then the disease is already endemic in that country. Implementing extreme quarantine measures after that first death, either within that country or by other governments to isolate that country, is closing the barn door after the horse is out. It's too late. Does not mean that a goal of containment is unrealistic. What we're seeing today in South Korea, Iran and Italy is the boom. Other countries will follow. The United States will follow. And so now we must fight. A city falls when its healthcare system is overwhelmed. A city falls when its national government fails to prepare and support its doctors and nurses. A city falls when its government is more concerned with maintaining some bullshit narrative than in doing what is politically embarrassing but socially necessary. That's exactly what happened in Wuhan. More than 30% of doctors and nurses in Wuhan themselves fell victim to COVID-19, so that the healthcare system stopped being a source of healing but became a source of infection. So Wuhan fell. The disaster that befell the citizens of Wuhan and so many other cities throughout China is not primarily a virus. The disaster is having a political regime that cares more about maintaining a self-serving narrative of control than it cares about saving the lives of its citizens. And so we must call out the Director General of the World Health Organization for his corrupt political response to COVID-19, whereby continuing to toe the literal party line, he sacrifices WHO's authority and credibility on the altar of China access. And so we must call out the President of the United States for his corrupt political response to COVID-19 as well. China has been working very hard to contain the coronavirus. It will all work out well. In particular, on behalf of the American people, I want to thank President Trump. Above all, that means calling out our leaders for their corrupt political responses to date and forcing them through our outcry to adopt an effective virus-fighting policy for our benefit, not theirs. 3rd of February, I said what is clear is that the CCP suppressed information until we reached a Groucho Marx, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes moment, which is the point he's making. Surely only 5 extra coronavirus cases in all of China outside Hubei province can't be right. Stephen McDonnell. Groucho Marx. Who are you going to believe? Anyone who uses stats from China to mock doomsters has mush for brains, Mishgaya. A non-linear and exponential virus represents the greatest risk to a control machine in point of fact. It's a point I made, William Burroughs, which is what epsilon theory is making as well. The viral moment has arrived. This is unbelievable. Iran's deputy health minister, Iraj Harichi, confirms he has contracted coronavirus and has been placed in quarantine. Watch this footage from Rudor English. We estimated that 18,300 COVID cases would have had to occur in Iran, assuming an outbreak duration of 1.5 months in the country, in order to observe these 3 internationally exported cases reported at the time of writing via The Lancet and Intel Wave. As I said, viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. What we're seeing in South Korea, Iran, and Italy is what exponential disease propagation looks like in the real world. Real world exponential growth looks like nothing, 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 then cluster, 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 then boom. Okay, let's move on to the international markets. Euro dollar 108.78. I think it's going to peter out around here and turn south. Dollar index 99.07. I think we're in a holding pattern before another move up beyond 100. Japanese yen 110.50. Quite a strong rebound from just below 110, which was where it initially broke out from. Swiss franc 0.9763. The pound 129.87. The Australian dollar is last at 0.6580. That's a fresh multi-year low. India rupee 671.764. South Korean won 1217.11. Brazilian real 438.83. Egyptian pound 1559. South African rand, which looks awful, 1523. And as I said severally since last October, it's going over 1550. Dollar index. This chart is from Santiago AU Fund. I think I agree with his chart. Euro dollar, this is from Stock God. I think it's petering out and going to head to 106. Commodity markets, as I said over the weekend, I would venture gold is correlated to the coronavirus and market perceptions of the coronavirus, which is set to turn parabolic and is already non-linear and exponential and has escape velocity. And I've already bought it, but I would be buying more on this pullback. We're currently at 1645. I think we'll end the year at 2,000. Crude oil, well, we're back below $50 now. That initial optimism that saw it rebound has petered out. Sub-Saharan Africa, let's talk Mubarak. I'll discuss policy in a sec, but let me explain Mubarak with a single photo. Him in a pinstriped suit where the stripes were a gold thread of his name. The fabric is from Savile Row, starting price £15,000. More for the gold thread. He was very vain. Interesting fellow. I read more about him from Said Abu Rish, who was writing about Saddam and how Saddam and him were always at loggerheads, and a lot of Saddam's problems were created by Mubarak. COVID-19 expected to cause widespread economic disruption in Africa. This is Standard Bank's chief economist Jeremy Stevens via Eric Olander of the China-Africa Project. The novel coronavirus is a black swan event, you can say that again, highly unlikely and with potent potential consequences. Nearly half of China's cities and districts are currently classified as low risk, and a return to business as usual is apparently imminent. They do that, they're going to reinfect everybody again. So, it's a double-edged sword. Nevertheless, the situation in China and globally remains both fluid and uncertain. We are far less optimistic when it comes to the impact of this outbreak on China's economy. The current consensus that growth will slow to just 4.5% in Q1 2020 is utter garbage. It's going to be negative, followed by a robust rebound and then stabilization seems optimistic. Immediate downturn is likely to be far more severe and acute. Consider that vast swathes of GDP have been frozen for an extended period. Manufacturing 32%, retail trade 10%, real estate 7%, transport 4%, automobiles 3%. Even now, after an incredibly rough few weeks, the Chinese economy is probably running at about 50% capacity. It's going to average that through the first half, I'm afraid. The financial system, which saw several episodes of liquidity stress last year, currently being used as a critical buffer to prevent greater corporate disruption will experience blowback. We expect restructuring, mergers and acquisitions, takeovers and bankruptcies. Much like in 2015, African countries are likely to see downward revisions in the coming weeks as expectations around China are downgraded. Worse still, African sovereign borrowing rates may move against them. Indeed, since the global financial crisis of 2008-2009, and during times of low rates, African governments have now accumulated record levels of debt. Gross government debt across sub-Saharan Africa has surged in an average of 20 percentage points of GDP since 2010, nearing an average of 60% of GDP in 2019. Should the Chinese economy expand by 4.5% in 2020, down from 6.1%, so that's not even going to happen. The entire global economy will struggle, expanding by just 2.5% in 2020. The less favorable external environment could end up shaving off at least 1.2 percentage points from sub-Saharan African growth. Fastened to long-standing historical trends, a stumble by a major commercial partner echoed into Africa. Sub-Saharan GDP slumped from 5.1% in 2014 to 3.1% in 2015 and then to just 1.3% in 2016, slower than advanced economies for the first time since the aftermath of the Asian financial crisis. Evidence of China's adjustment is also evident in Chinese imports of Africa, which contracted by 4% and remained below 2013 peaks. Recall that a 1 percentage point decrease in China's domestic investment growth is associated with an average of 0.6 percentage point decrease in Africa's exports. 2020, African countries have fallen in relative importance to China, that's a fact. This year, a demand shock and a price decline would be very difficult for Africa. Already, prices of key commodities, copper, oil, thermal coal, have fallen by 20% since mid-January. Reports are emerging that Chinese buyers have postponed overseas orders, some declaring force majeure. Consider that resource exports account for 40% of total exports in nearly half of SSA, and for 8, the ratio is about 70% of exports. China's infrastructure projects in Africa will face disruptions, big time, and they're going to withdraw capital as they bring the capital back to China. China's sales to Africa are likely to rise just a fraction in 2020, while China's purchases will depend on commodity prices. China's economy is likely to slow more than originally anticipated in 2020. This matters a great deal. Sub-Saharan African growth will feel the impact in a variety of direct and indirect ways. I called it the China-EM frontier feedback loop phenomenon, and I said the phenomenon was positive for the last 2 decades but has now undergone a trend reversal. This fallout is being experienced as far away as Germany Inc. The Rand is the purest proxy for this phenomenon. African countries heavily dependent on China being the main taker are also at the bleeding edge of this phenomenon, which is what the chief economist is saying. The pressure point will not ease soon but will continue to intensify. Lobster catchers on South Africa's west coast have become unexpected victims of the coronavirus epidemic after China halted imports of seafood in a bid to contain the outbreak. 14th of October, I was quoting Xi Jinping, who then, at FOCAC 2018, was speaking of the end of vanity, which I characterize as a substantive linguistic recasting of China-Africa. That momentum from that recasting is going to gain a lot of traction now. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. 9th of December, time to big up the dosage of quaaludes. Extreme concerns about coronavirus making landfall in Africa was an interview I did with Bruce Whitfield on the Money Programme. Have a listen. Togo president wins re-election in landslide. He could rule till 2030. Results give Nasigbe 5 more years in power. Blow for opposition protesters who have taken to the streets in recent years, calling for him to step down. At least 24 people were killed in clashes between Burundi police and unidentified militants in the outskirts of Bujumbura. That is on is, low level, but it's, 24 outskirts of Bujumbura. That's not good. Francophone countries question credibility of vote register in Guinea's March 1st election. It includes 2.49 million duplicate names, people too young to vote, or individuals who've died. Kobo 3. Of course, Putin got a new best friend forever in Africa in Alpha Condé. Since the days of the Soviet Union, you've been alongside us, protecting us, he told Putin. Boyarkin blames the protests mainly on outside forces and has nothing but praise for Condé. I consider him as savior for Guinea. Here you see Vladimir Putin and Alpha Condé during a meeting on the sidelines of the 2019 Russia-Africa Summit, about which I wrote in an article called From Russia with Love. South African All Share down 3.98% year to date. Dollar rand looking vulnerable to me, 15.50 coming. After that, it gets ugly quickly. Traders Corner. And that's where it's headed. Egyptian pound 15.59, EGX30 down 4.54% so far this year. Nigerian All Share up 0.71%. Ghana Stock Exchange down 3.35% year to date. John Deere is tapping tractor hailing tech in a bid to break ground in Africa. John Deere is outfitting its tractors with startup Hello Tractors technology, which allows farmers to hail the machines via an app, monitor the vehicle's movements, and transmit usage information such as fuel levels. We would like to see that every farmer has access to mechanization, he told Reuters. That the gap that we've identified is how do we connect small farmers with tractor owners. It's a ride-hailing farm style. John Deere is teaming up with the Uber of tractors. There's a little video from Reuters. I wrote about the platform economy previously in the context of Uber in Jumia. Jumia announced its financial results for the fourth quarter. Annual active consumers reached 6.1 million. Jumia Pay transactions accelerate 110% in Q4 2019 year over year. Precision airstrike eliminated Al-Shabaab leader associated with the Manda Bay attack. Post-strike assessments confirmed the two terrorists killed in the Feb 22nd precision airstrikes were an individual associated with the attack on Manda Bay and his wife, who was also a known Al-Shabaab member. The two terrorists were identified as a senior Al-Shabaab leader who was in charge of planning and directing terrorist operations on the Kenya border region, including the recent attack on Manda Bay, and his wife, who was also a witting and active member of Al-Shabaab responsible for facilitating a wide range of terrorist attacks. 13th of January, I wrote about the Manda Bay attack. I said it's the first Al-Shabaab has carried out on a US military installation inside Kenya. Among the aircraft destroyed were manned surveillance planes that collect data across the border in Somalia, as well as over Kenya's dense bony forest. Also reportedly destroyed were aircraft operated by US Special Operations Command and modified Havilland Canada -8 spy aircraft, which carries the US civil registration code N8200L. Then I was saying the US Africa Command has sent its crack East Africa Response Force to secure the airfield and augment security. And I said then it was a big deal. Nairobi All Share down 5.65%. NSE20 down 7.62%. Thank you for stopping by.